Hello my fellow gladiators, spectators, and warriors, and welcome to a special episode where we detail how my rehabilitation of my shoulder is going. This week, we're weighing in at 211 pounds, 1 pound lighter than last week. Welcome to another episode of Resurrecting Hercules.
Alright, so what I've been prescribed to do this week is I'm supposed to fascia roll a bunch. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just rolling my calf, my quads, my adductors, and my lats. So basically I'm just starting on the muscle, I'm rolling up it until I find a trigger point. I'm holding that point until 30, 40, 50 seconds afterwards, and then moving on to another point in the muscle, 3 points per muscle. And then this week for my rehab exercises, what they have me doing is sort of like a glute bridge where I'm squeezing my glutes, pushing in with my knees using my adductors, and sucking my stomach in with my hands straight over my head. So that's 5 seconds of holding that. And I'm doing that for sets of 10. So 5 seconds each, 10 sets of that. Then I'm doing reverse curls, which I didn't show you here. So I'm doing 10-second holds for that, trying to let myself down for 10 seconds. And I'm doing 10 of those as well. And then this last thing that I'm doing is really hard to explain. It's really mostly just to get my head wrapped around the idea of stacking my scapula correctly. So what I'm doing is I'm laying face down on the ground, sucking my stomach in, I'm squeezing my glutes, getting myself in a nice neutral position, and then I'm trying to, with my arms straight, which I'm not really good at quite yet, I'm trying to pull my scapula into position, basically pulling it downwards and inwards towards the spine without using my traps, my upper traps into this. So that's the hard part, is you initially just want to shrug up, but I'm trying not to use the traps, and I'm trying to pull my shoulder blades back. It's really tough, believe me, it's hard.
Alright, so building off of what I'm learning from my rehabilitation specialist, I am basically reprogramming how I do a pull, because before I wasn't actually stacking my scapula, doing a 3-point pull. So what you see right now is me just preparing for a back day. And what I'm doing is I'm first, with my arm completely straight, pulling my shoulder blade back, and then thinking about pulling it down into my back of my pocket in the back of my shorts. Honestly, it's really hard to think about how to explain it, but I'm trying to first pull with straight arm and then pull by packing my scapula towards my spine and downwards. By doing this exercise, I'm able to kind of get my mind wrapped around the idea, and then I can move on to something like a seated cable row, where then I try to utilize that same movement in a more difficult to perform position, which is the seated cable row. Now, I obviously have had troubles with my shoulders, so I am by no means a master of this. I actually do a completely different compensation for pulling and stacking my shoulder blades, so I'm trying to reprogram myself by doing a little bit of rehabilitation, doing a little bit of thinking before I do an exercise, but then actually applying it to an exercise with weight. By creating new neuropathic ways that I contract and perform movements, I am training myself to do it correctly, but I can't actually do it correctly unless I use weights. So I'm practicing and then using heavier weights. So sometimes you'll see my form actually fall out of correct positioning. So while trying to retrain my neuropathic way of using my muscles, I want to do different angles, that way I can challenge myself to master this concept from different angles that I'm pulling from or pushing from. So this is a low row right here, and you can see that I'm able to, it looks like I'm able to pack my shoulders pretty well. Just a small note for those of you who are suffering through the same shoulder impingement that I've suffered through for a couple years here. Whenever I was doing things like a low row, regardless of my form, it didn't hurt. So I'm really only using this exercise to retrain my thought process on it, even though it already doesn't hurt on this. Now onto somewhere where it actually does or did hurt quite a bit is a lat pull down, which is probably the most violating thing if you have a shoulder impingement. So I'm not doing a ton of these, neither am I doing a ton of pull-ups, but I'm throwing in 2 to 5 reps on a few sets every back day. That way I can get used to, you see my shoulders coming way up, pulling them down with that first straight arm, and then I'm packing my shoulder blades together, stacking them together as I'm going through the movement. And I'm trying to show it in the camera here so you can kind of see how it's looking. But this is a really hard concept for me to master. By no means am I showing you exactly how you should do it. I'm showing you how I am trying to learn to do it, because you can see me violating this form a few times throughout this. And when that happens, I can feel it in my shoulder. One thing I want to point out about my form before that a lot of people are doing is when you think of sticking your chest up for good form, oftentimes you're just raising your rib cage big time. So you need to suck in your stomach like a vacuum and get your rib cage down, and then to make your chest stick up, That's what stacking your scapula is. That's when you're pulling it together. All right, so now let's move on to chest day, and the same thing applies here. I am again trying to stack my scapula with that 3-point pull as I'm going through the motion. So when I'm at the bottom of the motion, when I have the dumbbell closest to my chest, I want to have my shoulder blades packed really nicely and tightly. So here's a little imagery without my shirt so you can kind of see how my shoulder blades are moving. This is what I'm trying to think of at least. I'm pulling my stomach in again, keeping my rib cage down, and then I'm trying to pull back with that first movement with my arms completely straight, then pull my scapula together as I'm lowering the dumbbell on a press, right? So this is the really hard thing. And I'm trying to keep my upper traps out of the movement in terms of I'm not trying to shrug upwards while I'm doing this. So putting it back to practical use, here I am using 50-pound dumbbells. I started with 20 on this, and I'm realizing that as I use a little bit more weight, it's a little easier to get these forms down. Starting at the top of the movement, I'm trying to think about dropping my straight arms an inch or two, right? Until I feel that first point of the pull. Then, as I'm dropping the weights, I am again trying to pull my scapula together, and I'm also trying to keep the dumbbells a little bit more forward than I was. I used to be benching with it right above my chin. Now I'm trying to keep it a little bit more towards the bottom of my rib cage. Again, doing all this stuff and trying to do this in proper positioning is kind of reprogramming how I'm actually pressing too. So I'm keeping my elbows in a little bit more throughout the pressing movement. I'm trying to utilize more of my pec here as I'm still thinking about these three different things. Doing the scapular stacking, keeping my rib cage down and my stomach sucked in, and squeezing my glutes as I'm doing this entire exercise. What I'm finding is that doing those three things is actually more tiring than the actual chest press itself, and I find myself kind of falling out of those positions, so I have to be careful with how much weight I'm using. So for the past 2 weeks, I haven't been trying to crush weights and make PRs or anything like that. I'm trying to reprogram how I do things from the bottom up instead of putting crazy amounts of weight on. But one thing that I am still able to use crazy amounts of weight on is the bicep curl here. So I'm using 60s right now. I'm working my way up to 65s, trying to do as many as I can, curling to the top, supinating my arms, and then finishing the same amount of reps that I failed at there with the supination with hammer curls, which is me not twisting it at the top. Right now, I think I'm getting up to 10. I want to get up to 10 just supination. Then when I can do 10 with that twist at the top, then I'll move up to 65-pound weights and do it all over again. So due to this restructuring of how I'm doing everything, I'm not using heavy weights, so I haven't put on any weight in these last 2 weeks. I also have dropped my calories a little bit in adjustment to not hitting crazy weights. But here's me doing some dumbbell lateral raises, and I'm using 15s here, which I know sounds like nothing, but I was starting with 5s on the beginning of this whole program, and so now it's pretty awesome. I'm using 15-pound weights. Again, I'm trying to keep all this stuff in mind. My glutes squeezed, I'm trying to keep my rib cage down, my stomach stuck in, I'm trying to keep my shoulders in a good position stacked in there. They get very fatigued super quick now, but it's fun to be able to do lateral raises and front raises again. Like legitimately, I haven't done them in two and a half years, and it's awesome to be starting to build the groundwork for having bigger shoulders in the future, like I used to have. Big old boulder shoulders. Now this is just a small segment in this longer episode, but I really wanted to put these in now that I'm able to show you this exact exercise. This is the exercise I always talk about being one of the best for building those thick, blocky, separated abs. This is just basically like a wall that your butt is pressed against with a little pad to help for your lower back, and then you're just gonna load it up with the heaviest weight you can use while keeping your spine in a good position. You know, everyone feel lower back pain or anything like that, but I personally used this in the first like 4 or 5 years of my lifting, and I would try to aim for the heaviest I could go for 15 to 20 reps per set, and I would do 3 to 4 sets. This is such a dope exercise, if you can find it. So if you haven't picked it up by the end of this episode, this whole video is based off of my shoulder rehab stuff. So in terms of getting bigger this week or these last 2 weeks, that wasn't really the plan. The plan is to, again, like I've said a few times in here, just get used to the new way that I'm supposed to move my body, really trying to train my way with different accessory exercises, really strengthening all my weak points with a progression of those rehab exercises that I showed you in the other episode. I do want to mention my calories. I was going for 4,200 to 4,500 calories, and I was planning on progressing it a little bit more, but this week, because I have kind of lined up the weights this week specifically, I've dropped to somewhere around 4,000 calories, and I do think that in the next 2 weeks, while I am doing a lot of this
rehab stuff and trying to retrain myself. I think I will be going a little bit heavier. I will be using a lot more energy, so I will be trying to aim for that 4,500 plus calorie target range. All of that obviously contributes to the fact that I didn't put on weight this week. I actually think I dropped like half a pound or something like that. But that's actually not a bad thing, because what's happening is I'm using all of this effort, these 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, you know, 2, 3, 4 months, it doesn't matter, however long it takes to rebuild the way that I'm doing these movements. Then when I am back to full on just pressing as hard as I want to, not having to think about any of the movements because they're all just kind of like in there autonomously, then we'll be able to make more progress than we were previously, because I won't be doing them incorrectly, I'll be doing them correctly. So I'm taking the time to build the frame correctly so that we can build a really, really, really big house. So not the flashy aesthetics fitness world that you sometimes see in my Hercules episodes, but I did want to cover exactly what I have been doing these last 2 weeks, because I know a lot of you guys suffer from shoulder problems, shoulder impingements, or just general postural issues, or really any sort of issue that you might be facing that this could be applicable to. I try to cover what I'm doing as transparently as possible, instead of trying to like bolster myself up and just say I'm bigger and bigger and bigger all the time, or try to use angles or anything like that. I want to bring you guys on the journey with me as transparently as possible, you know, week by week, day by day, showing you what I'm doing and stuff, so that if you're suffering through the same things that I have suffered through, the shoulder impingements and things like that, you can try some of these things and see if they help you, or just in general know the path that I took so that you can also take that path as well. Maybe see a specialist who can kind of get you your own rehab exercises. But that is rounding it up for this episode. I'm excited to see what's gonna happen in these next 2 weeks. Hopefully we can get ourselves really firing correctly with that 3-point pull that I'm talking about, and also adding a little bit more mass now that I'm gonna eat a little bit more calories and hit some heavier weights. But we will see in the next episode of Resurrecting Hercules.